Would you risk everything, even hunger, for the chance to write your own destiny? On the morning of August 18, 2025, Captain Traoré of Burkina Faso did just that. He stunned the world by ordering the entire United States Embassy out of his country within 3 days, a command so audacious that no African leader had dared it in decades. The news ricocheted across the globe. In Ouagadougou, the capital city, people awoke uneasy. But so did Paris, Brussels, Moscow, Beijing, and, most of all, Washington. This was more than a diplomatic gesture. It was a direct challenge to the global system of dependency that keeps entire nations tethered to foreign aid. The implications were vast, stretching far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. But the risks are staggering. Burkina Faso teeters on the edge of hunger, facing the loss of vital support, medicine, and international backing. Critics call it reckless, maybe even suicidal. Yet some hail it as the boldest act of self-determination Africa has seen in a generation. For Traoré, the choice is stark. Accept a life shaped by others, or claim the dignity to shape it yourself, whatever the cost. It is a gamble that echoes the high-stakes decisions of other nations, such as Cuba's embargo-era defiance or India's early years of non-alignment. Standing before his people, Captain Traoré spoke uncompromisingly. This was not merely the eviction of diplomats, it was the rejection of humiliation, the refusal to let outsiders script Burkina Faso's future in their own language. No more silent submission in exchange for bread, no more bowing for the sake of survival. His words recalled the voices of revolutionaries before him, like Patrice Lumumba, who in the early days of Congo's independence rejected colonial dictates and called for African dignity, or Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's own legendary leader, who once said, "He who feeds you controls you." What would drive a leader to gamble everything on an untested dream of freedom? Now, as crowds surge through the streets and governments hold their breath, the world waits to see whether this act will spark a new era or bring devastation. What would you choose? Security under foreign control or the dangerous freedom of self-determination? But how did Burkina Faso reach this breaking point? To understand the stakes, we need to look at the history of foreign aid and the invisible chains it can create. Consider the post-colonial period. After their independence, many African countries found themselves dependent on aid to rebuild. For decades, Western money funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, but often with strings attached. National policies were shaped by donor expectations, and local leaders found themselves balancing their people's needs against the requirements of distant capitals. For generations, Burkina Faso's heartbeat has pulsed to the rhythm of Western aid. American and European money built its classrooms, filled its pharmacies, and paid the salaries of nurses and teachers. Even its soldiers, its last line against violence, relied on foreign support. In 2024 alone, more than $500 million flowed into the country from international donors, propping up everything from vaccination campaigns to food distribution networks. But every handout has a price. When a sharp American report landed in the palace, it did more than criticize. It listed Burkina Faso's own military on the same page as the extremists they had fought for years. For most, it was paperwork. For Captain Traoré, it was humiliation that stung like salt in a wound. The report, which accused the military of human rights abuses, was read aloud on national television, causing outrage across the country. "Aid without dignity is a chain," he snapped, voice tight with anger. With those words, he changed the argument. What is the value of bread or medicine if every bite tastes of shame? His words echoed those of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, who warned of neo-colonialism, the new forms of control that replaced the old colonial powers but kept African nations subservient. In army barracks, soldiers fumed. They had risked their lives for their people, and now found themselves equated, by foreign eyes, with the very enemies they hunted. In homes across Ouagadougou, parents and children alike felt the insult. Was every sacrifice meaningless? Was the decade-long struggle against armed groups in the north now to be dismissed as criminality? This pain was not new. It echoed a long history, the old colonial story that cast Africans as inferior, their fighters as criminals, and their independence as something to be bargained away. Each generation had been forced to accept someone else's version of their story. In Algeria, during the fight for independence, French reports often described freedom fighters as bandits, a label familiar to Burkina Faso now. The air inside the palace grew heavy. The country stood on the edge. Dignity or dependence? Which would Traore risk? Which would his people accept? The stakes were clear. Accept the comfort of aid and the indignity of being dictated to, or embrace the hardship of sovereignty and the uncertain promise of self-determination. Now a choice pressed down on the palace. If they accepted the insult, their children might inherit a future written by outsiders. If they rejected it, they might inherit only uncertainty and struggle. The room was filled with memories of past leaders who faced similar crossroads. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, chose dignity over compliance. The question was whether Burkina Faso could withstand the storm that would follow such defiance. When the world's mightiest nation is told to leave, who truly claims victory? On August 18, 2025, Captain Traoré made his choice, setting off a chain of events that would shake not just Burkina Faso, but the entire region. The world would soon be forced to reckon with the consequences. In diplomatic circles, comparisons were drawn to Iran's revolution when Western embassies closed and the nation faced global isolation. Outside the embassy in Ouagadougou, crowds surged against iron gates. Inside, American officials hurried to secure files, pack up their lives, and lower the flag. As the stars and stripes slipped down for the final time, thousands watched, silent, sensing an era's close, with a mixture of triumph and dread. The capital was electric with uncertainty. On the morning of August 18, 2025, a seismic decree shook Burkina Faso. The United States Embassy was to be expelled. Never before had this small West African country forced such a mighty partner to retreat. This was not just diplomatic theater. It was a pivot, a line drawn in the sand. For many, it recalled the Suez Crisis of 1956, when Egypt's Nasser nationalized the canal and Western powers were forced to withdraw, signaling a shift in global power dynamics. Captain Traoré's voice cut through the airwaves. No nation can prosper on food that comes with shame. His words echoed from radios and rooftops, sparking pride in some, anxiety in others. He insisted that Burkina Faso had lived too long on the largesse of others, buying survival at the price of dignity. For some, his speech recalled the fiery oratory of leaders like Julius Nyerere, who called for African socialism and self-reliance in Tanzania. In the barracks, young soldiers thumped their chests, proud and defiant. Students gathered in the streets, waving flares, chanting for a future they could claim as their own. Families hugged, swept along by the thrill of regaining control. Yet, beneath the celebration, a question refused to fade. What happens when the medicines run out? When the aid convoys stop? When the shelves grow emptier with each passing day? For Burkina Faso, the stakes could not be higher. Could national dignity fill empty bellies? Or was the cost of pride a hunger too sharp to bear? Would sovereignty truly sustain the people, or leave them more vulnerable than ever? The question echoed through the halls of power and into every home, as families wondered what the next week would bring. That night, as fireworks flickered over Ouagadougou, the mood inside the presidential palace was far grimmer. Ministers pored over ledgers, tallying dwindling reserves of grain and medicine. They debated how to stretch what little remained, how to replace the millions of dollars in vanished aid. Each calculation deepened the lines of worry on their faces. They faced decisions similar to those made in Zimbabwe in the 2000s, when economic isolation forced leaders to ration every resource. But as dawn broke over a changed capital, The world watched, questioning what would come next. In a region where others might follow, was Burkina Faso forging a path or courting disaster? Neighboring Mali and Niger, already wary of Western influence, watched events closely, debating their next moves. Can a nation survive hunger if its people choose it freely? In Ouagadougou, that question is no longer philosophy, it is daily life. Since the embassy gates slammed shut, panic has flooded the markets. Prices for rice, fuel, and medicine soar beyond reach. Clinics ration the last of their supplies. Teachers warn that schools may close before the month ends. The shock of lost aid is not an idea, but an ache in the belly, an empty pillbox, a future clouded by doubt. Ordinary Burkinabe are the first to feel the loss. Mothers return from market with lighter baskets. Fathers fret over dwindling stores of millet. Children miss lessons as classrooms go dark. The safety net is gone. Each day, new sacrifices ask, can dignity truly fill an empty stomach? The lived reality mirrors that of Cuba during the special period after the Soviet Union's collapse, when scarcity forced families to improvise, share, and adapt in the face of adversity. Yet amid hardship, something fierce awakens, a unity kindled by the leader's words, better hungry with dignity than full with shame. Across city blocks and dusty fields, the phrase spreads, part comfort, part rallying cry. Even as hunger sharpens, pride grows sharper. On street corners, artists and elders urge patience, calling for solidarity. For many, this pain becomes a badge of honor. Community kitchens spring up, neighbors share what little they have, and impromptu markets form to trade goods without cash. Opponents warn of catastrophe. In Parliament, they wave reports of rising prices and empty shelves. On the radio, critics ask how long before hunger breeds revolt. Yet on the streets, defiance smolders. Surveys show a strong majority still stand by Traoré. The sting of foreign humiliation lingers, and the memory of orders from distant capitals is hard to forgive. The people remember the times their choices were dismissed in international forums, their voices drowned out by the priorities of others. The world is transfixed. From Senegal to Ghana to Congo, students march with Burkinabe flags, chanting for freedom from old masters. Leaders in Mali and Niger hinted following suit, watching the drama unfold next door. Farther afield, Russia, China, and Turkey offer deals, partnership without lectures. The West grows uneasy, fearing a chain reaction. Will other nations tear up the old script? International news outlets debate whether this marks a new era of African agency or a dangerous flirtation with isolation. If you could shape your nation's fate, would you choose safety or self-respect? Still, suffering is real. Every skipped meal and shuttered clinic leaves a mark. Yet for many, the deeper wound would be surrendering autonomy, giving up the right to write their own story. That pain is harder to mend, and it lasts longer. For the first time in a generation, Burkina Faso's future is being shaped by its own people. In village meetings, citizens debate the way forward, weighing short-term pain against the hope of long-term freedom. The crisis is far from over, and every choice now shapes the nation's fate. In the next chapter, we see how hope and hardship intertwine as Burkina Faso faces its most uncertain days. Will the population's resilience lead to innovative solutions like urban gardens or alternative medicine? Or will desperation force a return to the old ways?
But pride cannot fill an empty stomach forever. What will Burkina Faso and the rest of Africa learn from this ordeal? And how will the world respond to this hunger for dignity? Will new partnerships be forged? Will Burkina Faso develop local industries, like Ethiopia did with its textile sector after aid cuts? Or will it face deeper hardship, as Zimbabwe did during years of sanctions?
Foreign aid can quiet hunger for a day, but it rarely nourishes a people's pride. True sovereignty is never handed over, it is won, and the cost is real, sometimes hunger, sometimes loneliness, always sacrifice. The world watched as Burkina Faso's captain gave up comfort for the hope of dignity, but the real price of independence is paid in small daily decisions, not just in a single bold act. In every village council, family dinner, and market stall, the people debate, adapt, and decide whether the struggle is worth it. This moment is bigger than Burkina Faso. It is a question for every country. Who gets to write your history? If the lesson is lost, the world may remember only a brief, bright hope that faded to silence. But if it is kept alive, the choice made today could shift how a whole continent relates to power, pride, and possibility. The echoes of this choice will resonate in university classrooms, in street protests, and in the silent hearts of future generations. Symbols are hollow if they are not backed by resolve. If defiance becomes performance, the old chains slip back, hidden by new words, new agreements, new faces. What seems like victory can sour into another version of control as powerful outsiders rebrand their dominance but never truly let go. The struggle for self-rule requires constant attention, or today's freedom will quietly become tomorrow's dependence. Nations like Vietnam, after winning independence, faced the challenge of ensuring that new alliances did not simply reproduce old dependencies. Dignity is not a trophy for one moment. It is a promise that must be honored in every deal, every law, every act of refusal to let others tell your story. This is not only the burden of leaders. Ordinary people, teachers, merchants, children, must carry the lesson forward, refusing to let outside voices drown their own. In post-independence India, for example, millions worked to build local schools and industries, turning slogans into reality. So, what will you choose? Bread or honor? And will you leave this moment to the politicians or claim a share of it for yourself? Now, the world does not dictate to Africa. It listens, waiting to see if your voice will rise or if the echo will die in silence. This is the challenge and the promise of this moment: to speak, to act, and to insist that history is written by those who dare to shape it. The decision in Ouagadougou echoes far beyond one border. Now the world is watching to see if this spark becomes a movement or a warning. Will artists write new songs of freedom, or will hunger silence the chorus? Will neighbors help one another, or will fear and scarcity breed division? The answer depends on each citizen, each act of courage, each refusal to bow to despair. August 18th, 2025 was not just a political quake. It was a rupture, an invitation for the world to bear witness, to listen closely, and to remember. One order from Burkina Faso's capital forced the most powerful embassy on earth to abandon African soil. The true weight of that act was not measured in headlines or treaties. It was measured in the hearts of ordinary people, suddenly asked to consider, what price does real independence demand? For generations, comfort arrived in boxes stamped with foreign flags, sacks of wheat, crates of medicine, textbooks, and the soft promise of help. But every gift came with a thread, an expectation, a story written far from Ouagadougou or Lagos or Kinshasa. Each shipment fed both bodies and dependents. Each whispered promise of support quietly asked for silence, for the right to narrate Africa's story, to choose its heroes, to define its scars. Many recall how, after independence, leaders like Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya warned of the dangers of aid that undermined national sovereignty. History is not only written in palaces or by those with armies. It is shaped by those who refuse to accept humiliation as the price of survival. In this moment, we are all witnesses. The future belongs to ordinary people who choose to remember, to speak, to resist the erasure of meaning by comfort. The story continues every day, in every act of courage, every refusal to be silenced. When Captain Traore drew his line, he did not offer easy comfort. He demanded a choice, not just from politicians, but from every citizen, every parent, every viewer. Would you accept golden chains or risk the bite of freedom? Would you trade dignity for certainty or face the uncertainty of dignity? The question is timeless, echoing through the ages, from the revolts of Haiti's slaves to the independence struggles of Southeast Asia. This is your moment. Will you stay silent, hoping others will speak for you? Or will you add your truth, insisting that Africa's story belongs to its people, not to distant hands? Will you organize, share, and connect, building networks of solidarity? Will you teach the next generation that dignity is worth the risk? Stand tall. Share your truth. Because history remembers only those who refuse to be silent. The choice is yours. The future is unwritten. Will you claim it? The world is waiting. What you do next, how you remember, how you speak, how you demand dignity, will shape not just one nation, but the fate of a continent. The path will not be easy, and the rewards are uncertain. But freedom, in all its pain and glory, is the right of every people.